Welcome back to an Introduction to Missions. Today we're talking about the apprentice term. Now, when I say the word apprentice or apprenticeship, what comes to your mind? Many times we think back about many years ago when people would go into a trade, they would go into an apprenticeship. In fact, today many trades actually offer apprenticeships where you come and you learn the skill sets on the job, and you are mentored by someone who understands what to do and how to do it, and you follow their lead until you learn how to basically be competent in your own way. And that's essentially what an apprentice term is about, is coming under a missionary who understands how do you gain language and culture, how do you do the work in that context, and being mentored by them. It's a great time of growth because it takes the stress off of having to figure out how do I do this, and being mentored by someone who can help you. Let's get started. To an introduction to missions, today we're talking about an apprentice term. An apprentice term is your first term, your first 3 years on the field with the International Mission Board. The purpose of an apprenticeship is to help a new missionary gain competency in language and culture while learning the basic missiology necessary for the engagement of a people group. Many times in the past, without an apprentice term, a missionary might go to the field and they spend 3 years learning language and culture, but not learning the basic missiology they needed. And so they would get involved in all kinds of ministries, but they were not best practices or the best use of time. And so there would be a learning curve for them to get back focused in their second term of ministry. Or they would go to the other extreme. They would get involved in good missiology and trying to shortcut language and culture, and in a sense hamstringing themselves, not being the most effective they can because not fully understanding the culture and not being able to communicate in the language to an effective way. So essentially, the apprentice term is a guided time to help alleviate the stress of trying to figure out how to learn a new language, how to adjust to a new culture, and how to be active in the work of reaching a people group with the gospel. Now, within the apprentice term, there generally are 7 areas of competency that is tried to be covered during this time. Those areas include the area competency of being a disciple or abiding in Christ, walking in the Spirit, our worship and the Word, being a family member, whether it's our own family as a individual, single, relating back to my family back in the States, being a couple on the field, being there with my kids, and also relating to friendships and stuff, whether they be on the field here or back home, and also nationals. Then the area of cross-cultural witness, where we're talking about personal evangelism and being able to effectively share the gospel. Also, they need to grow in the area of mobilization. As a mobilizer, they're connecting the body of Christ, the local body, and also the body from back in the States to the work, first in praying, but also in giving and going and sending workers to the field. Then there also is the competency of being a team member, working with your team, working within your role, understanding core missionary task competencies. What are the basics we're supposed to be about? What's my part on the team in order our team to fulfill our role in engaging a certain people or place? Then the competency of a servant leader, where essentially we are seeking Christ's interest in others, whether it's on my teammates and my national partners, where we're just wanting to serve Christ's interest in others. And then lastly, growing in the area of a church planting facilitator, being an effective part of church health and church planting, both of those, because we want all churches to be planting, but some churches aren't healthy enough to plant, and so helping them get healthy, get focused, get grounded in biblical missiology is helpful for them to be able to be active in the work. So as we dive deeper into these 7 areas of competency, we see that growth in these areas is accomplished through monthly systematic tasks that are reported to a mentor. And so each each unit, each individual or couple, they will have what's called a primary mentor, and they will help walk them through these different areas. It's not like you do one area, then you go to the next, but all these are combined, and they're given some instruction, but also given tasks to work on so that they can grow in these areas, so that, in a sense, almost guarantee certain levels of competency by the end of their first term. So some of the sample tasks of growing as a disciple, really, this is just, are you having a quiet time and time in good devotional reading to grow in your own walk with the Lord? Now, we may assume that, but we can assume that of a lot of people. But here we want to make sure that we're actually doing it, having a quiet time. Usually when a person does not do well, their marriage begins to fall apart, they begin to have a moral crisis or something like that, all those things usually are traced back to they just stopped having time with God. And if we don't have time with the Lord, He can't correct us, He can't encourage us, and if we're not abiding in Christ, we can't see Christ working through us. And so just having some accountability. Am I in the Word, as letting the Lord deal with me, deal with any sin in my life, in all that I'm doing? Another area is the area of family member. Some of the simple tasks there is, are you communicating back with family in the States? You know, some people can over-communicate where there's not a day on the field they're not talking to family. And then some have the other extreme where they don't talk to them for months on end. And so there needs to be a healthy balance. A person needs to still retain a love for their homeland, but also learn to love the place where they are now. Other tasks are just simple, basic things like setting up your house. You know, where are you going to live? Getting the furnishings that you need, connecting the utilities and things you need to function there so that you can make a house a home. Then how do you invite someone over to your house? How do you host someone in that culture? You know, what is the etiquette there? What sort of things do you serve? What's the order of all that? Learn how to do that, and then actually do that. Invite some new friends over for tea and a snack. This is if you're learning to be a good family member with your own family, but also learning to fit in with the culture and do this to build relationships, because it's through the relationships that we're going to be able to share the gospel. Also, we're looking for opportunities to go and visit a nationals home so that we are getting involved in people's lives. And so we want to be growing in this area of being a good family member, and it spills over into being a good neighbor and a good friend as well. But also, being a good family member also means you take breaks. So are you taking a vacation? Have you done the work of language and culture to certain competency levels so that you can take a vacation? And so they want you in your family life, in your social life, in a sense, to be established and to be healthy, because if you're not healthy in this area, staying long term is going to be very difficult. And so you need to be able to do that. Another area is your cross-cultural witness. Some of the basic things here is first learning how to introduce yourself in the local language. How can I talk about the gospel to somebody when I can't even tell them who I am? And so you're going to be spending at least 32 hours a week in language involvement. That's not just all class. That's class time, study time, practice time, using the glue approach. And we'll talk about that later on. Basically, the glue approach is get what you need, learn what you get, use what you get, and evaluate what you used in order to make systematic, intentional progress in the language. Another thing you want to do here is map your community. You know, do I understand where the roads go, where the places are, the businesses are, where the people live, where the religious sites are? Mapping that out, getting to know my neighbors, establishing a routine with at least 10 locals. So as we do this, it helps us get out to talk in the language, to learn some of the culture, learn the area, but it also gives us opportunity so when we do get language so that we can begin to share it. So one of the tasks would be share your testimony in 4 to 5 sentences. Now obviously we want to be able to share more than that long term, but as we're getting started, what is a good place to start is just in a very simple testimony presentation. Later, you'll learn a very simple gospel presentation just to get out and start sharing the gospel in a very contextual way. You want to also, in this stage, be able to identify specific cultural topics, things that are either bridges or barriers to the gospel. Bridges are points of contact with another worldview that are easy to talk about because both worldviews agree on those topics. That's why there's a bridge there. Some things are barriers where people shut down on hearing us, and so we want to know, okay, this is a barrier to this worldview. How do I address the barrier so the gospel can be approached here? And so this is a learning time. It's learning how to speak the language so I can share the gospel in the language, learning simple tools to do that, learning contextual things that help me get into the gospel, things to address while I'm in the gospel in order for that to flow. Another area is as a mobilizer. So you want to be able to create a newsletter and other communication mediums to connect to your support churches. You want to connect them to the people. That means the people group, to the place, and to the progress of the work. Now, for security reasons, you don't want to connect to them all at the same time. It may be just about the people group, or it's about the place geographically, or religiously, or it's about the progress of the work. And so you need to be mobilizing your church to be able to pray about what God is doing and pray for the people and where they are, and hopefully mobilizing them to come and do some things in the work. You also want to meet other expat workers in that area. Many times we call these Great Commission Christians, or GCCs for short. And what they are other foreigners trying to engage the same people. We want to meet them. We want to connect with them to see if we can do some collaborative work for greater engagement. We also want to visit local churches and their leadership. We want to include other believers in our normal routine. How do we do life? Because the enormity of the work will require more than just us. It'll be more than what our team can do. It will take the body of Christ. And so we are mobilizing our connections back home, mobilizing other workers who've come to the field, and then most of all, mobilizing the local indigenous church and their leadership to engage in the work. In regard to a team member, our first, in a sense, person we relate to is our primary mentor. This is a person who's going to help walk us through all the basics of what does it mean to be on mission, what are the things I need to deal with and do, all the ins and outs from the business side of things to the personal side to the mission side of things. And so we want to meet with them on a regular basis and just be teachable. You may be seminary trained, you may be experienced in the States, but the smartest people are the people who remain teachable. And so some basic things are, how do you complete an expense report? How do I do an out-of-bed report? How do I do other reports so that I can just be accountable for the things I'm accountable for? Another thing you'll do with them as well is submit weekly language learning reports to your language and cultural coach. So who have you been talking to? What have you been doing? What are you learning? What are the walls you've been hitting, the struggles you've been having, and just doing this, because right now in your apprentice term, your primary role as a team member is to get the language and culture down in the core task of evangelism and discipleship so that you can make a valid contribution to the team and to the team's work. You also want to, in regard to language, take a language snapshot ever so often just to assess your progress. A snapshot is like a test interview where someone who's trained in how to gauge your proficiency in the language, the complexity of your words and your sentence structure, the clarity of your pronunciation, your fluency, is assessed to see where you are, what areas you need to work on so you can continue to make progress in there. And being a good team member means I'm going to work hard at these areas because my team needs me to be competent in these areas. There's also the task of a servant leader. This can be just as simple as praying for your organization, praying for the leadership of your organization, praying for your team, praying for local partners as you get to know local pastors and local believers, praying for them and encouraging them, reporting on the progress on monthly goals with a primary mentor. Because it's not just about you, it's about what you can do to make yourself usable for God's agenda. And so just being accountable once again and being responsive to input, correction, encouragement, so that you can be made into a very healthy missionary. In regard to church planning facilitator, it's good just to get out and start meeting churches, meeting believers. And so I would encourage you to attend at least 2 different churches every month. You do want to have a church kind of as a base church that you and your family are going to invest in your time and relationships in, but also get out and visit some other local churches because you're wanting to connect and network to be a mobilizer among other believers to be a part of the work. Another thing you want to do here is you want to incorporate prayer walking in your language route. And so as I'm going, I want to meet people, want to experience the culture, learn about the culture. I want to share, but I'm also praying. I'm praying for the people, praying for God's mercies, that they would know their need of the gospel, that they would know the gospel and respond to the gospel. And so we're praying for that and praying for a local church to be planted among them. We also want to learn just how to worship in the local language and be able to sing all these things that we want to do in a church plant. We want to learn in our apprentice term so that we can slowly be able to share the gospel in the language. We can be able to disciple in the language. And as a church is started, we can be able to do those things in the language. So learning a Bible verse in the language once a month is a good start. Learning a gospel presentation in all those scriptures you want to do. I know many of you have like a repertoire of verses that are in your memory in English. Let me encourage you to intentionally, systematically begin to convert those into your new language so that you can pull from that same reservoir those things that you need for sharing the gospel. I'd encourage you also to interview other Great Commission Christian partners or GCC partners and local church leaders. What are they doing to effect church planning in the area? What is their burden? And what are they doing, just to see how you can network and mobilize and be encouraged by, but also maybe be an equiper of others who want to see churches planted. And then learn your team's best practices in regard to the core missionary task, or CMT. Well-experienced missionaries have already been in that context, in that culture, and ways of sharing the gospel, ways of discipling to get to church. Learn those things. I would say learn them. Also observe your team practicing those things so that you can really get that, so that as you become competent in those areas, you can go and do those as well. I would say until you've learned them and used them, don't change them. There's a reason why they do what they do, how they do it. You may have some insight on how to tweak it, how to improve it, but learn one way how to do these things before you try to water down your approach in too many different ways. But these are just areas of competency that one needs to learn in regard to getting proficient as a missionary, and your apprentice term, your primary mentor is there to help walk you through all these so that you can be very effective in the work. Well, that's going to do it for the day. Hope this is helpful as a general overview in apprentice term, and we will pick up next time talking about learning language and culture. Until then, have a great time. Well, that's going to do it for the day. Hope you understand that an apprentice term doesn't mean that you're not competent in some ways or that you're deficient. It is really a hands-on approach to helping missionaries get well grounded so that they can be the best that they can be and be successful in subsequent terms. Well, until next time, that's going to do it for the day. Have a great day.